In today's video, I'd like to talk about a hypothetical 2020 presidential matchup between Democratic hopeful Tulsi Gabbard and current Republican President Donald Trump. And it's a great time to talk about this because Tulsi Gabbard just recently announced that she's going to be throwing her hat in the ring and running on the Democrats' side. Now, the video I made yesterday talking about Julian Castro, I started things off saying where we don't really know how he stands on the policy issues in a lot of different cases. Not the same problem here with Gabbard. She pretty much is in lockstep with other progressives like Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. And that's really helpful in trying to make a case as to whether she'd be able to win some of these states or not in comparison to Julian Castro, where it's just more on the surface of his intangibles and does he check off those boxes that the centrist Democrats like to do in terms of identity politics, where you don't go as much into the meat of the policies. But we're not going to have that issue here with Gabbard. She's very clear on where she stands with these issues. And again, it's very similar to Bernie Sanders. Now, just a couple of things I want to talk about with Tulsi Gabbard before jumping on in and filling out the map. First and foremost, I think it's pretty clear that she's probably not going to be able to go on and win this nomination. So my tinfoil hat theory on this is that she's getting into this process, going across all of these different media outlets, getting her name and message out there more, and at some point early on within the process, bow out and then try to join perhaps an Elizabeth Warren or Bernie Sanders as their vice president, and probably more so Bernie Sanders, because when we take a look back at 2016, Tulsi Gabbard was the vice chair of the DNC, and she quit that position so she could go on the road and campaign for Bernie Sanders, and she was one of the only Democrats to put her political career on the line and do that for the progressive cause in 2016, which is why there's so much love for Tulsi Gabbard amongst the left wing of the Democratic Party. And that will help her get more name recognition, obviously, out there with what she did back in 2016, especially if Bernie Sanders isn't running. Gabbard almost feels like the de facto other progressive to vote for, unless you're also going to be voting for Elizabeth Warren or choosing between those two options. But again, if she's not doing well early on, at least she's getting her name out there more. And then when she comes in and perhaps wants to be the vice president of another candidate that's still alive in the race, like a Bernie Sanders, for instance, I think it's a pretty political savvy move. And that's just my take on how I see that situation playing out. But if it is Tulsi Gabbard to go on and win that Democratic nomination, I think Bernie Sanders would be full force behind her candidacy and campaigning for her and getting out there. And he might even be a vice president option if she's able to go on and win that nomination. That also will help her with a big chunk of that Bernie Sanders support that's clearly out there right now across the left's electorate. So starting off here, I want to give Gabbard what I think would be her safe states and then do that as well with Donald Trump and then talk a little bit more in depth about the more competitive areas. So starting with Gabbard here, going to be giving her Washington, Oregon, and California. And then clearly she's going to go on and win Hawaii. Any Democrat would win Hawaii, but specifically Gabbard because she is the congresswoman that represents the state. And then moving over to New Mexico, as well as Illinois, the most left-wing of the Midwestern states, and especially in a 2020 turnout scenario where you'd expect a lot of Democratic voters in the population centers in and around Chicago to be going out and voting their support for the 2020 Democratic nominee. And then moving over to the east, we have Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland, the District of Columbia, and then Maine minus the 2nd Congressional District, and then also going up into Vermont and New York. And that's what I think would be pretty much the extremely safe results for Gabbard if she was that Democratic nominee. And then doing the same for Donald Trump, starting off with Alaska up there in the north, and then Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, Utah, and then going into the plain states of North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, minus the 2nd Congressional District, Kansas, Oklahoma, Missouri, Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee, Kentucky, West Virginia, and South Carolina. And of all of these redder states that I just filled out, maybe the only ones you could make a slight case would perhaps be states like Kansas, where they just elected a Democratic governor in 2018, and things have been getting a bit more competitive in the state of Kansas, a bit more purple than some of these other Great Plains states, and then going into the Rockies. In the Northern Rockies here with Montana, they have shown that they can elect Democrats statewide elections, just like they did with Jon Tester in 2018. They also have a Democratic governor, so certainly a state where Democrats can come through. It just hasn't been the case as much in presidential elections, for instance. And also, probably should fill in Indiana here, especially with Mike Pence being the VP for Donald Trump. And then that puts us into a situation where we have 190 for Gabbard and 125 for Donald Trump. So now I want to go through and talk about the rest of these states and how I would see them playing out. So starting off in Nevada, this is a state that's consistently becoming more blue, it seems, by the years. The Democrats did very well here in 2018, winning the statewide elections, flipping that Senate seat, and then also the governorship went to the Democrats in Nevada. I think it's pretty straightforward that Gabbard would be able to go on and win Nevada. And then also Colorado, another state that continues to look better for Democrats as the years go on. I think that would be also a pretty safe play for her. And then going down to Arizona, this is a state that went for a very conservative Democrat in 2018 in the midterm elections. This is a state where demographics are getting a lot better for the Democrats, and it's likely to be purple going forward and maybe even switching a bit more blue as we head down the line. And that seems to be a continuing trend here within the Southwest. We've seen especially states like Nevada, Colorado, and New Mexico go much more consistently blue, and it seems like the next hat to fall is going to be Arizona, and then following that at some point in the future, perhaps Texas as well. We'll see how that plays out. Donald Trump, he was able to defeat Hillary Clinton by a slight margin, about 3 to 4 percentage points. I'd really like to see some polling here before flipping it over to Gabbard in this scenario, especially she doesn't have overwhelming name recognition, obviously, and there's going to be a lot of states in here where I think that Gabbard could be able to pick up the state, but I'd just like to see more information before flipping it over to her in the Democrats, in comparison to Donald Trump, who's already shown that he can win a statewide election in a lot of these different areas that I'm going to be talking about in these battleground states. So even though I think Gabbard has a decent shot at picking up Arizona in 2020, still going to be giving it to Donald Trump for the time being. And the same case I'm also going to make in Texas. Now, for the Democrats to win Texas in 2020, it's probably going to have to be somebody like a Beto O'Rourke, for instance, and that might be their best chance, obviously, to go on and win the state. But even if he's the nominee, it does not guarantee Texas to go to the Democrats. And then moving up to Nebraska's 2nd congressional district, the closest district within Nebraska, but they still went for Donald Trump in 2016, and their congressional district held with the Republicans in 2018, which was a very strong year for Democratic voter turnout. Now going in to the Southeast with Florida, and Trump and the Republicans did very well in Florida in the midterms of 2018. And again, it was not the greatest year for Republicans, obviously, in those 2018 midterms, but it wasn't really the case in Florida. They kind of bucked the trend. DeSantis won his statewide election. They also flipped that Senate seat. I think Trump would be able to just hold on to this one going up head-to-head against Tulsi Gabbard. And then a similar case in Georgia, which is a little bit more to the right than Florida, but still a competitive southeastern state. In 2018, Stacey Abrams very close against Kemp, but she still came up 2 or 3 percentage points short. And again, this is a state that's becoming a bit more competitive. Hillary Clinton only lost to Trump by about 5 or so percentage points, but I still think that Trump would be able to hold on to the Southeast here in a head-to-head matchup against Gabbard. Now, we actually did get some polling numbers recently out of North Carolina with the top 6 possible Democratic candidates. Only 2 of them had the outright lead, that being Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders, the ones that had the most name recognition. Now, that clearly is a factor in the other 4 top nominees that potential nominees that they had in that poll, like Beto O'Rourke and Cory Booker, were down by 1 point against Trump, and then Elizabeth Warren as well as Kamala Harris were at a dead even tie in North Carolina. And if the Democrats go on and win North Carolina in 2020, that pretty much locks up the presidency for them, because North Carolina is a more Republican-leaning state than a lot of these key Midwestern states. So you figure if the Democrats win North Carolina, that means they're also going to be able to pick up the Rust Belt states that they have to pick up to go on and win the presidency in that instance. But again, with the only 2 Democrats polling ahead of Trump in North Carolina being Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden, name recognition clearly being a big factor there. I think it could be close with Gabbard versus Trump, but still going to be giving a slight lean to the Republicans there in North Carolina. Moving up to Virginia, and kind of in the similar vein to western states like Colorado and Nevada, Virginia has been trending very nicely in the direction of Democrats, and it's for a different reason. So you could probably say demographics out here in the Southwest have been more favorable to the Democrats, but in Virginia, it's been more suburban voters that have been flipping from the Republican Party to the Democratic Party, and things are looking a lot better for Democrats in this state right now, and I think that Gabbard would be able to hold on and keep the state. Hillary Clinton was able to win it back in 2016, and I think Gabbard would do likewise in 2020. And then moving up into New Hampshire, having a very progressive Democrat, I think plays well up in the Northeast. She would almost certainly win Vermont by a large margin given her allegiance and ties to Bernie Sanders, and that probably also plays well in a state over in New Hampshire. Now, the 2nd Congressional District of Maine, that's a tough one. It just went to the Democrats because of ranked choice voting in 2018. Trump won this district rather convincingly back in 2016. I still think he has enough of a cushion there where he'd be able to keep it in a matchup against Tulsi Gabbard. So now going into the meat of the Midwest where this is going to be decided, I have Gabbard at 222, Donald Trump at 236 right now. So first I'll start off with the more left-leaning and right-leaning Midwestern states. Starting with Minnesota, the Democrats absolutely crushed it in the state in 2018. And even back in 2016, with Hillary Clinton not the most popular candidate by any means in the state of Minnesota, she was still able to eke out a victory there over Donald Trump in a very close election. I think it's pretty straightforward that Gabbard would be able to go on and win this one. And I wouldn't be surprised if it was convincingly, because if we look back at the 2016 primaries, Bernie Sanders did extremely well in Minnesota head-to-head against Hillary Clinton. And the fact that Gabbard lines up very significantly with Bernie Sanders, I think that plays well for her in Minnesota in 2020. She'd be able to pick that one up. Now going into Iowa and Ohio, which are lean Republican states, certainly. If we go back a little bit further, Obama was able to carry these states in his election bids, but it's not easy for Democrats. You have to be a very charismatic, special type of candidate. Is Tulsi Gabbard that person? Perhaps we need to see her out on the campaign trail and seeing some polling data that would suggest that. But for now, the fact that Trump was able to win these states by considerable margins in 2016, I'd still give him and the Republicans the lean to keep Ohio as well as Iowa. Now we get into Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. 3 states that were decided by less than 1 percentage point between Clinton and Trump. And the shortcomings of Clinton, the fact that she's supported those free trade deals throughout her career was a crutch for her. And even with that, throughout the Rust Belt, she still almost was able to get over the line in comparison to Donald Trump. But he was able to flip these lean Democratic states over to the Republicans. But what should work in Tulsi Gabbard's favor, she's going to also have a more populist message, clearly in comparison to the Democratic candidate Hillary Clinton from 2016. I think that really helps her, and also getting that boost from Bernie Sanders throughout this particular region of the country, I think also helps boost her chances. And on top of that, in 2018, the Democrats really crushed it in this section of the country. They won statewide elections in the Senate and governorships in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, with Pennsylvania being the one that went most Democratic in those 2018 midterms, and then Michigan following suit just behind that, and then Wisconsin also bringing up the rear. And with Wisconsin, even though their governor's race was really close, they had to take down an incumbent Republican governor, which isn't the easiest scenario. But we also take a look at that Senate race with Baldwin, the incumbent Democratic senator, who's actually one of the more progressive senators, and she won by over double digits in her matchup. So I also think that's a good sign for progressive politics in a state like Wisconsin. So this is the map that I have between Tulsi Gabbard and Donald Trump, at least at this point in time, without a whole lot of polling data, obviously, to go off of. So Gabbard at 278, Donald Trump at 260. And the big difference maker for me here is Gabbard likely getting a lot of support from Bernie Sanders and his cause, which should carry over and really help her in some of these key states. And just on top of that, having likely a lot of grassroots progressive support behind her candidacy. If Bernie Sanders isn't going to be running, then a lot of that support would go over to her candidacy. So that's going to wrap this one up, guys. For more of this type of content, consider clicking that subscribe button. I hope to see you guys back here for my next video.